Hey, GRF students, it's Mr. Naimatsu here. I'm coming in with your second activity on the progressives on period 7 and kind of their influence on Teddy at certain levels. All right, so let's get into it. Um, the progressive era and the progressives are kind of an outgrowth of the populace. So if you remember in period 6, at the very end of period 6, we talked about the populace, and it was largely a farmer and urban is the way they actually kind of united. It became like the Knights of Labor, if you remember, like the labor interests, the poor workers from the urban areas, and then it became also the poor farmers from the Farmers Alliance, the Ocala Platform, the Grange Movement. Hopefully, some of these are a little bit familiar, and if not, don't worry, we'll review them. But basically, a lot of poor farmers and a lot of poor workers, especially white workers, kind of came together to form like the populace, and that outgrowth of the populace became the progressives. And the progressives are going to pull in even more. So, first of all, they're going to be very anti big business. One of the biggest things they're going to stand for is they're against those things called trust, right? If you remember Carnegie, JP Morgan, Rockefeller, all these guys built these large corporations, these large companies that were companies within companies. And basically, they had monopolized and taken control of all parts of certain industries, causing harm perhaps on the living standards of and the pay of urban workers, and making it difficult for farmers to compete due to prices, and also due to shipping costs, right? Of trying to transport their food from one place to the market, and that market being the New York market, the South market. Remember, when we say a market, we're not talking about like Bonds or Ralph's or Food for Less or something. We're talking about a market is a group of buyers that want to buy your item. In this case, the apples or whatever you're selling. So the biggest thing that they're going to stand for is really for a focus on political reform to get kind of the bribery, the scandals, the corruption, right? That's the word I was looking. I was trying to look for a word. I'm going to use the word political corruption out of government. They're going to do their very best. California is a very interesting state because we are an outgrowth of the progressive movement. Upton Sinclair, which is one of the muckrakers, actually becomes one of our governors and passes a waves of progressive reforms that we have today. So something called the Proposition Initiative and the Proposition Initiative, which is a way in which we can get votes onto our state constitution to change votes. You'll see this a lot during election time when people are asking your parents or maybe even yourself if you're a registered voter and if you'd like to vote, or sorry, not to vote, if you'd like to sign a piece of paper. They're gathering votes to show enough interest to put that onto a ballot. And if it's on the ballot and it gets passed, then it becomes a law. And this is what's recently happened, kind of the one that's recently happened the most that you want to think about is recreational marijuana. Recreational marijuana was done legal through the proposition phase, which is where it's not an actual senator that wrote the law up at the state assembly. It's actually the people wrote the law. They put it on the ballot. Somebody wrote the law. They put it on the ballot. We all voted it. We went past 50%, so it became a law. So that's really what they're going to stand for. Another outgrowth of it is going to be, social reform, child labor. They're going to really look at critically. Women are going to get the right to vote, and that's going to be underneath theoretically a progressive president. Just like the populist, there are still racial undertones. So these expressions of justice and fairness and equality that's being extended to women and expanded to children and expanded to to these working men, are not necessarily going to go towards individuals that are categorically minorities, right? African Americans, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans are largely going to be not part of the fight, right? So, but they are taking a step, and remember, this isn't 2020 and this is 1900. They're taking a step towards recognizing the rights of other marginalized groups, even though other groups around them may be even more marginalized than themselves. Um, so that's pretty much what it is. You can also say the prohibition movement, not which a lot of people are concerned about and probably passed due to the fact of the 19th Amendment, which women's right to vote gets passed during this time, like I said. But prohibition during the 1920s can be seen as another effect on the outgrowth of the progressive movement. So That's what they kind of stand for, and that's what you're going to kind of know. I'm obviously a big fan of the progressives and their ability to check big business on the expense of the of a poor worker, right? Their ability to put in certain guardrails in government to stop political corruption, and also make sure government starts running effectively, right? You're going to get the Food and Drug Administration, I think, you believe, comes out of this, out of this time. A lot of different government organizations are going to make sure that what you are, product wise and otherwise is safe, and that there are criminal liabilities if your safety is harmed. So, some good stuff from the progressives, for sure. But if you're a big business person, you're probably not the biggest fans of these guys. These guys were a threat to your wealth and your established way of doing things. Like I told you, we had the muckrakers. As you can see, it actually can be considered. You notice that yellow journalism pops up. It can be considered yellow journalism because this was a kind of an exaggeration. It's interesting. This shows the meat scandal and him like raking muck, right? Raking all these problems. But one of the famous muck rakers, and a rake is like something that rakes like leaves, but if you're raking muck, right, you're trying to get the muck out of there, just like you're trying to get the leaves out, right? So that's what these guys were supposed to do, and they did it theoretically, and what I would want to think historically is through investigative journalism. But in often cases, that was it. So, like one of the most famous ones is The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And here he documented the lives of workers inside of a meat packing industry. In the meat packing industry, I believe they're kind of like making sausages or like hot dogs. And everything that he's writing is completely false. It's a fiction. It's a novel. It's something that he made up based off of experiences, but it's not anything true. These are made up characters. It's a novel. And what he really was trying to do is trying to talk about the exploitation of the workers. I think they talk about this, but what really happens is a lot of people read this part about how the hot dogs are being made, and people are losing their fingers, and rats are all over the place, and rats are dropping their fecal elements into the hot dogs, and it's getting churned up with the meat and being packaged, and no big deal, right? And so out of these muckraker experiences, whether it be alcoholism or women's rights or food or political corruption, people will hear about these things, and similar to yellow journalism, will respond. And even though they're not true, they're exposing some kind of larger truth that's happening in society. And so that's kind of the goal of the muckrakers. One of the progressive presidents we all know is Theodore Roosevelt. The reason why he'd be known as progressive, we'll talk about in a second, is called the Square Deal. But the video kind of, or article, whatever it is, goes right into his kind of foreign policy. And his foreign policy was called the Big Stick ideology. He said famously, "Walk softly, but carry a big stick." It means don't like run around, go crazy, but let everybody know that you'll use this big stick, which in his opinion was the military. And so here you can see kind of a funny cartoon about, hey, watch out, the king in Europe, Monroe Doctrine. This is actually Roosevelt corollary saying, hey, get the heck out of Santo Domingo, which is a Caribbean state right next to Cuba, right over here. So he was just known for that. You're going to learn about the Panama Canal. I could go on a long time for the Panama Canal, but basically Colombia had owned Panama, and there had been a large interest by not only the United States, but also Europeans to create a canal to ease trade going from the Atlantic to the Pacific to go faster. Probably should show you the Panama Canal rather than kind of pointing to it. So if you don't know where the Panama Canal is, that happens, no big deal. This is the area, and it links the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. Find my zoom, just my hands, as you can see here, and obviously this cuts not only the time, but also like the safety, right? There's some really rough seas all through here. The tropics are usually pretty nice, but in between here on the very bottom and top of the globe, you have some serious seas. So it makes it travel faster, a little bit easier. And so there had been a long time that individuals had been thinking about this, and the Americans wanted to get into it. At this time, this area called Panama, that we'll zoom into now, this was part of Colombia at this time. All this area was part of Colombia, and basically a bunch of Panamanians said, we want to be independent, and they're kind of encouraged by the United States. The United States kind of said by their side, hey, if you guys want to be independent, we'll come back you up. And so they do. The United States come in, they defeat the Colombians, they create a brand new country called Panama, and what do you know? The Panamanians suddenly make an agreement that the United States can have some land, can make a canal, and in addition to that, can own that canal for like 100 and something years. We just gave it up, I believe. But yeah, so that's the story of the Panama Canal, which is an interesting one. The backstory, if you want to be critical of the U.S. government, it seems like we kind of staged a mini revolution to give us the excuse that we're coming into Panama on the right in behalf of democracy for the Panamanians. Some Colombians would say that was staged so that you can just take this land and profit off of it. This is history, my friends. Reason why he is known, this guy, Teddy Roosevelt, and whose cousin will be FDR, by the way, is because he's known about creating this something called the Square Deal. And the Square Deal was basically, we're going to make a deal with labor, we're going to make a deal with big business, and we're going to come to a square deal. Sorry, I have to give you a square, give you a box. But anyways, the idea was labor's going to give up some items. You're not going to get everything you want, but you're going to get some things you want. So maybe we'll have a limited work hour day, but maybe we're not going to rate a minimum wage at this time. Blah, 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 blah. And then business, by the way, we're going to start busting you on trust and stuff like that if these things happen, or if you don't give up into some of these things that the workers want. So he kind of brought multiple groups. He's famous for like intervening, using the federal government to intervene, whether it be lawsuits or actual like physical force, intervene in labor disputes and other things, and gain the people together and say, hey, what can we do to open up this factory, have our workers get paid, have our workers feel good, and move this thing forward. So I'm not saying that he was the greatest victor of labor rights, or but he definitely, that was one thing he was known for, and one thing that the progressives definitely supported, right? So it's not like he was the guy to do it, but he definitely made some great strides, more so than presidents before him, to really look at both sides of this issue. The last article I read is about the 19th Amendment. It basically rewinds your history all the way to Seneca Falls, 1848, and the Civil War, and the introduction of the 15th Amendment, and allowing black men the right to vote, but not white women. And then also, do we allow all women to vote, which includes black women or other women of color? So you're going to get into that. It'll do the whole history, but we know actually, during World War I, it was kind of put on the back burner as the United States focused on war. But when it came back, especially you're going to read, I forgot who it was, but there's a famous woman advocate that kind of supports the war, which is usually not what women typically, I guess, do. And especially, she was kind of taken a step by not focusing on the 19th Amendment by supporting the war. But the idea was, at the end, which Woodrow Wilson guaranteed he did, was to help support the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which did happen. So after World War I, the 19th Amendment was passed. So this is kind of an interesting article, because you're going back to 1848 and they're skipping all the way to 1919, right? Teddy Roosevelt, I think, is in the early 1900s, 1909 or something like that. So, but that is another outgrowth, one more time, of the progressive movement. Right, just like I could say prohibition probably was an outgrowth of the progressive movement in the past too, and also women's right to vote, as they were concerned about probably sexual abuse, domestic battery, and just some of the problems that the drug of alcohol creates. So, anyways, and actually it talks about why some people were very concerned that women would pass a law to stop people being able to drink. So that gets you through this activity. We're going to talk about the presses, the muckrakers, a little bit of Teddy Roosevelt, and the 19th Amendment. So there you go. All right, A pushers. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.